So I think it's important when you think about a charitable structure, understanding terms and language. So one of the most common terms in the sector of charity is something called 501c3, and there's a lot of sort of unfortunately ambiguity in that term itself because it actually is nuanced in terms of what it means to be a 501c3. Parenthetically, and I think rather importantly, interestingly enough, 501c3 actually refers to a section in the Internal Revenue Code called Section 501c3. Section 501c3 in the Internal Revenue Code deals with organizations that are exempt from tax, but also allow that when a donor contributes funds or assets to the actual organization, at the time of the contribution, the gift is tax deductible to the donor, okay? And there's some nuances here, and I'm going to kind of explain that, but that's sort of the overriding answer to the question about what is a 501c3. Now, to get a little bit more complicated, there are many types of 501c3s. There are two main types of 501c3s, and then within those two types, there's two types of types within that and the three types on the other type. And I'll explain what I said. It sounds a little confusing, but it won't be. Basically, there's a private foundation, which is a 501c3, and there's something called a public charity, which is also a 501c3. A private foundation, there are two types, and this is complex, but I will again clean this up in a second, but there's what they call a private operating foundation and something called a private non-operating foundation. On the public charity side, there's another section called 509A, and there are three types of 501c3 public charities, okay? And it's not something you should memorize. This is just so you can appreciate that there's a lot of nuance in the legality of 501c3s. The three types that are there are one, a 509A1, a 509A2, and a 509A3. Now, I want you to just let go of everything I just said, but realize that private foundations is a different type of 501c3 than a public charity. A private foundation is an actual 501c3 of which the source of funds is generally one or a few sources of funds, okay? Whereas a public charity, the funders are the general public. And a public charity are things like the City of Hope, the American Red Cross, Big Brothers Big Sisters organizations. They are funded by the general public. The rules are, and I'm not going to go into all the nuances and technicalities because there's actually some fairly complex formulas, but basically, in order to be a public charity, at least 1/3 of your support has to come from the general public. Again, at least 1/3 of your support has to come from the general public. If you cannot achieve this calculation, then you would be classified as a private foundation. This question seems like a simple question, what is a 501c3? But it's rather complex, as you can see. The rules of a private foundation are different than the rules of a public charity. The rules of a private foundation, for example, include things like you have to give away 5%, a minimum of all your assets every year. That's part of being a private foundation. In addition, private foundations are subject to something called an excise tax. There was a recent change in the amount of the excise tax, but that tax is now a flat tax on any investment gains of a private foundation, and that amount is 1.39%. Okay, there are also very strict self-dealing rules with private foundations. In addition, there's rules called excess business holding rules. There's jeopardizing investment rules as well for private foundations. So private foundations are very highly regulated 501c3 organizations that are typically set up by the rich. And because the rich are rich, the IRS has a form of distrust against the rich that they may do things cleverly to maximize their personal benefit from a private foundation, so the rules are strict, okay? And maybe later in some of the other videos that we're shooting today, I'll explain more about the strictness of private foundation rules, but I think that's something important for you to understand. With regards to a public charity, public charities receive their financial support from the general public. So when you see campaigns where they're raising funds online for a public charity, that's what you're seeing, is they're raising funds for a public charity to do good. If it's for something like prostate cancer, you might see the United Prostate Cancer Foundation raising funds for it, right? They're engaging in a campaign where they solicit funds from the general public, of which will go to cancer research, as an example. These are called public charities, and they seek funds from the general public. Typically, public charities actually have programs and activities. They literally conduct programs and activities, as opposed to private foundations, which for the most part, and it's a little more nuanced than this, but for the most part, they actually are simply grant-making organizations that grant monies to, for the most part, public charities. So there's a relationship between the two entities in a symbiotic way. And if you listen to my introduction at the beginning, where I explained that this industry, this nonprofit ecosystem, is a nuanced ecosystem, which means that you really have to understand the different players within the ecosystem to understand how the rule sets work together, so you understand where are you playing, what structure are you involved with, and how that plays with the other structures that are around. So private foundations, this is like one of the big sort of epiphany moments for this particular video, they actually are related to public charities in that they, a lot of times, if not all the time, give money to public charities. Public charities are the organizations that actually do the good work that we all see them doing. Cancer research, fighting homelessness, helping the hungry, alleviating gang violence, helping the incarcerated, social justice, prison reform. All these things are public charities. They're actually going out and doing the good work that they do.